Welcome back to Issues of Faith. We are talking about Pope Francis's letter on the environment. We have with us Father Bruce Morrill, professor of Catholic Studies at Vanderbilt. And so this was issued 7 months ago?
Yeah, June of 2015.
And when you talked about it, you said there was anger on the part of at least one person in the congregation. What has happened in that 7 months? Do you see it making a difference? Is it being followed, forgotten? Kind of what has happened in that 7 months?
Yes. Well, again, what has happened really is a matter of location and context. We might remember that in the wider society, when Pope Francis addressed the United Nations, well, first of all, Congress, he certainly mentioned this. It was part of his address to Congress. So to bring that right to the center of the U.S. government. But likewise, when he went on up to New York, likewise he included this issue and references to his document at his address to the United Nations, and pointed, at that time, that was September, this past September, pointed toward the UN-sponsored climate change summit that was to take place and did take place in Paris in early December. So the impact there has been real. I've learned through colleagues and didn't realize myself how quickly some other peoples of other religions and leadership were issuing letters on climate change and documents shortly thereafter. So they really picked up on this notion of address to people of goodwill. It's humbling to think that yeah, the papacy has such an influence, but it does. I mean, not just to Christians or Catholics. So in the wider world, there's been a lot of a pickup in momentum and support and use of the document. Here in the States, it's mixed. Catholic Relief Services, I just got an email yesterday from someone in Atlanta who works for them who said, I noticed, I don't know, through Twitter, I don't know what, that you're doing these things at Vanderbilt this semester on this topic, these lectures and so forth. I hope you realize we have a whole set of web-based tools to help people pray with and learn about this document with Catholic Relief Services. And one might wonder, well, why Catholic Relief Services? Well, as I mentioned in our first segment, so many of the people struggling by these changes in climate, I mean, most Americans probably aren't aware there's another great drought in Ethiopia. Sub-Saharan Africa is undergoing great trouble this way, and that just starts to move people, refugees and so forth. It exacerbates political conflicts like in Syria because climate change is a factor there. There was already several years drought going on that could help support insurrection and all the civil war. So.
And yet the opponents, I mean, people who disagree or whatever would say that's always been the case, and how can you blame it on this? And so as somebody who hears the back and forth and lives here in the United States, how optimistic are you? Do you think, and I'm talking now about climate change in general, it's obviously important to you. You're hosting a series of lectures there at Vanderbilt on the Pope's letter, but how optimistic are you when you see the back and forth here in the United States and even hear people in the congregation? What do you think?
Well, a couple of things. It's not surprising because of the strong positions U.S. citizens have taken, or a certain percentage have taken, with regard to accepting and learning from the hard sciences. So there's nothing really in our social life that isn't political in the sense of people must make decisions, debate, and then make, well, policy decisions of how we're going to live together in the limited resources that we have. So my optimism more is with, as a baby boomer, is with younger generations, hoping that they'll keep the momentum going of their concern. They're recognizing much more as a whole, as a percentage of the whole, that we don't live in limited resources, that progress is not a matter of an idea that we can just keep going with, but rather we live in a limited physical environment. We're responsible to each other, etc. My pessimism might come back in that, well, is there youthful zeal in that and optimism that gets tempered as people deal with a lot of their own nitty-gritty issues in life? Well, I choose to be optimistic about it, that this will be a carrying forward concern.
And how should the Catholic Church be a force in this in the United States? Does it mean getting political? If you're following the Pope and his letter, does that mean go and get political? Or how do you respond to this?
Yeah, how do you go and get political? That would again be a matter of our own education first. in my opinion. And so running the lecture series at Vanderbilt and really trying to get the word out to all of Middle Tennessee that they're welcome, but also my being invited, and some of the speakers I'm bringing in March will also be speaking in the evenings in parishes that we're open to having them come speak also. So the key thing first is to get educated, but also to recognize the integral relationship between our social, real-lived, in-society concerns are complementarily supported by the faith that we celebrate and profess in church, and vice versa. So there's that step. Moving from there into the overtly political arena, whether it's local, state, federal government, well, this is nothing new to Roman Catholicism. Every January there's a March for Life, which has predominantly been about anti-abortion, but now focuses somewhat more on end-of-life issues as well. We'd like to hope there'd be greater emphasis on capital punishment, etc. But the point would be, of course there's political involvement. The question is, will people come to see, will Roman Catholics come to see, that the climate change issue, the science showing us about this 2-degree rise in temperature, the exacerbated forms of storms that keep happening now, can we get by the sound bites, the news bites, it happened and we keep moving, and start to connect the dots, the historical narrative, and realize that the impact is here. Those are educational issues, those are choices on what to notice and what to address. But yeah, of course, yeah, political, no doubt.
When you, and this lecture series, tell us broadly what's going to happen. You're bringing people in. This is over, it's more than one lecture. It's a series, obviously.
Yes,
you know,
yeah.
So broadly, what's going to happen in this?
Well, the first step gets snowed out. Climate change might not affect a certain snowstorm, but a couple Fridays ago in January, it's bad luck. But we're bringing in a couple of environmental philosophers, not themselves religiously professing in any way. We're on a panel, we're to be on a panel with me, with one of our divinity recent grads working in sustainable agriculture and food issues, myself to give this sort of overview of what is this document. It was a huge interest and a lot of chagrin that we got stormed out, but we got to move forward. The next couple of speakers will come in March, and they're both young scholars with doctorates in social ethics, one teaching at the University of Virginia, one teaching up at Manhattan College, Liberal Arts College in New York City, and they'll bring their own expertise. The one from Manhattan, Kevin Ahern, who works on the large and ancient Christian concept of the common good and how this applies to a globalizing context. Common good not just about our local little town or community, but really we cannot deny we live in a global situation now, totally interlaced global situation. And then the next day, our primary speaker, Nicole Flores, will come from the University of Virginia. Her specialty is around immigration and family and women's issues to address that way. I've got respondents in each case from Vanderbilt coming. I'm excited and grateful. Anthropologists, lawyers, law school, Peabody School in terms of education, social formation, and one of our own social ethicists, Emily Towns. So in the takeaway, in 10 years from now, how will the Catholic Church be different? How do you think the worldview will be different, if at all, when it comes to climate change? What do you think? Well, I think one of the great takeaways will be, first of all, in dioceses, at least maybe not so much in the U.S., but in many parts of the world, there already are great efforts to make the physical operation of the parishes and the dioceses themselves globally responsible. Economically, but also in terms of all the smart technologies now that are being advanced. Questions about investments, etc. Takeaway, I think in terms of our schools, we already see it at all the levels, K-12, but then in our Catholic colleges, universities, that this question becomes one that starts to pervade the curriculum, which includes economics, which includes political science, which includes law. Let the debate happen. But then finally, there's going to be greater suffering, and by all predictions of the scientific community and the social scientific community, we're going to see in the Catholic Church the vast majority of the population, Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, the Philippines, we're going to see a lot of our fellow sisters and brothers suffering more as a result.
And it's a fascinating, difficult topic, but thank you for boiling it down. Thank you. Father Bruce Morrill, pastor of Catholic Studies at Vanderbilt, thank you. And thank you for watching Issues of Faith.
Wow.